4 grandparents here this morning for her baptism, and 4 great-grandparents are here. How many of you are great-grandparents? Raise your hand. How many of you are great-grandparents? Raise your hand. Did I say it wrong? Oh. How many are great-great-grandparents? Raise your hand. Okay. A class of 3rd graders was assigned to write on the topic of their choice. One boy chose the topic, "What is a grandmother?" He wrote, "A grandmother is a lady who has no children of her own. She likes other people's children. A grandfather is a man grandmother. Grandmothers don't have to do anything except be there. They're old, so they shouldn't play hard or run. Everybody should have one, especially if they don't have television. Because grandmas are the only grown-ups who've got time. They don't have to be smart, only answer questions like, why dogs hate cats, and how come God isn't married. Well, the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren is special and unique, and a relationship that needs to be developed, nurtured, and treasured. When geography is a problem, families can do FaceTime or Zoom meetings, which are popular. And when grandparents are unavailable, then adopt friends, neighbors, church family to be your grandparents. Why? Because grandparents are needed for remembering, for bridging, and for encouraging. In the scripture lesson this morning, Paul wrote to Timothy and was praying for him. He said, I pray for you and I miss you. And then Paul reminded Timothy of the rich legacy he received from his mother Eunice and his grandmother Lois. His grandmother Lois played a very important part in his life. And no doubt she remembered, she told the stories, she bridged the generation gap, and she encouraged her, Timothy. Well, number one, we need grandparents for remembering. When I visit the elderly, I often hear a repeated refrain, I'm no good to anyone anymore. Why does God leave me on this earth? Well, the purpose for people to being on this earth begins with remembering, telling the stories. All of us, including children, need to remember. We need that sense of identity. We need to know our roots in the family, our roots in the nation, our biblical roots for our faith. We need grandparents to put life and breath into those roots. The famous anthropologist Margaret Mead has written, one of the reasons we have a generation gap today is because grandparents have copped out. Unquote. Some grandparents have abdicated, feeling they're not worth anything. They don't want to impose. They don't want to be a burden. And those families suffer a huge handicap because they lack the participation of their grandparents. Every family needs grandparents who have not abdicated, grandparents who take their responsibilities seriously, and realize that their help is really needed for the family to thrive. Now, the grandparent role does not need to be played solely by the natural grandparents. In fact, the more grandparents a child has, the more fortunate she or he is. Our family has been blessed with family camp over the years, where adopted grandparents have greatly enriched their lives. Adopt grandparents. Did grandparents contribute significantly to your life? Yes, mine did. I had all four of my grandparents around me, living together in the house sometimes, living next door on the farm sometimes, and at the other times, a maximum of 5 miles away. We were all close. And my mother's family, all 30 to 40 of us, would gather almost every Sunday afternoon. Both my grandfathers were great storytellers. Oh, how I love to listen to their stories. And it was a highlight when I got to stay overnight with my grandpa Norris. And I slept in the other twin bed, and we talked into the wee hours of the morning. How I loved those anecdotes of where he lived, what he did, what the Great Depression was like, and the stories of my coming into the world. Children love to hear those stories of how they belong and how rich the stories of grandparents can enhance their lives. At last Wednesday's sermon study group, Mike shared fond memories of his grandmother sitting on the porch in Kentucky, shucking beans, smoking her corncob pipe. How many of you have had grandmothers who smoke corncob pipes? And then she told the stories. She told her family stories. Before my father-in-law died, following a hospitalization of several weeks, he knew he was dying, and he talked about it freely with the family. Ellie took our cassette tape recorder and asked him questions about his life. And now we have hours of family history. What a beautiful way to leave this earth. Take the opportunities to tell the stories, to share of who we are and where we have come from. How can today's youth know who they are and where they are going if they don't know where they came from? And they need grandparents to help them remember. How do you account for the fact that the Christian faith is alive in Russia? Russia has spent 4 generations trying to discredit, trying to suppress the church. Someone answered, grandmothers, Russian grandmothers. They tell us that if you go to church in Russia, the only people there are old women, grandmothers. But for 90 years, the same grandmothers? So those grandmothers passed the stories on. They remembered. So first, grandparents are for remembering. And secondly, grandparents are for bridging the generation gaps. A grandparent has a special relationship with a grandchild that is different from that of the parents. And this relationship has the possibility of being rare and beautiful, and openness and honesty, different from between parent and child. And a grandparent encourages communication that bridges gaps. Grandparents listen and encourage sharing. One grandson told about how he received one grandson told about the sex education he received, not from his parents, but from his grandmother. She was not embarrassed, she was not shocked, and she answered every question he asked. There's an advantage we have between having a generation gap. Youth are searching for adults with whom they can be open, honest, and intimate. And grandparents and adopted grandparents can fulfill that role. Grandparents are needed for remembering, for bridging, and thirdly, for encouraging. Few of us have the resources to live our lives successfully all by ourselves. Few of us have the without support, encouragement and love. Few of us can make it without the established roots in our family, down into our family, and down into faith that is deeply planted in a fertile, watered soil. And do you know what else children and youth need today? They don't need any more people telling them what to do. They don't need any more people telling them what they're doing wrong. They don't need any more advice. What they need are grandparents who think they are perfect. Grandparents or adopted grandparents who will love them, accept them, tell them the stories, help them remember. Everyone needs grandparents. Someone in their lives who will fight on their behalf. Everyone needs a grandparent to encourage them, to believe in them, to be there with a hug. Everyone needs someone to feed their ego, to shower them with attention, esteem, and respect and encouragement. Everyone needs a grandparent. I will never forget my Grandpa Irwin, who believed in me, who had pride in me. When he was dying, I had to leave him and go back to seminary. We both knew it was goodbye. He sat in his chair, aching with cancer, and I received his rich, beautiful blessing. He told me how proud he was of me. He told me I was going to do good things in the world. He told me of his high expectations. And there have been many times when discouraged, I remember my grandpa's belief in me and his pride of me. Grandparents are needed for remembering, for bridging, for encouraging.